For centuries, cartographers used a very specific visual shorthand when they reached the absolute limits of their geographic knowledge.
Right, the edges of the map.
Exactly. They would draw the edges of the known map, and right there, in the empty, uncharted waters, they'd sketch these massive, terrifying sea monsters.
Oh, yeah.
They'd literally write, "Here be dragons." And the underlying assumption was simple and honestly pretty bleak.
Which is that if you step off the edge, you're doomed.
Right. You reach the edge of the known world, and you're going to face absolute destruction.
It taps into a very deep-seated human psychology. I mean, we are just terrified of the unknown. The edge of the map traditionally means you fall off into the abyss or you get eaten by something you don't understand.
But, history eventually proved the map makers wrong. The world isn't flat. Stepping off the edge of the known map doesn't actually mean falling into an abyss.
No, not at all.
It actually means discovering an entirely new, completely uncharted ocean. An ocean that is completely free of the established empires who are all fighting over the old world.
And from a strategic economic standpoint, finding that uncharted ocean isn't just a relief. I mean, it is incredibly profitable because you are literally the only one there.
Which brings us right into the mission of today's deep dive. We are talking directly to you today, whether you are prepping for a boardroom meeting or whether you're trying to launch a startup out of your garage.
Or if you're just insanely curious about why some businesses seem to effortlessly dominate the world while others are constantly struggling just to survive.
Exactly. We are unpacking the core mechanics, the actual blueprints, hidden inside the Blue Ocean Strategy ebook by W. Chan Kim and Renée Mauborgne.
Such a foundational text.
It really is. We're looking at a framework designed to help you stop competing in cutthroat, bloody markets and instead create entirely new, uncontested market spaces. Think of this not as a dry academic theory, but as a thrilling, highly practical treasure map for innovation.
And it's a map that requires you to actively unlearn almost everything you have been traditionally taught about how business works.
So let's start with the fundamental geography of this map. The authors divide the entire business universe into two distinct types of spaces.
Red oceans and blue oceans.
Right. Red oceans represent all the industries that exist today. This is the known map. In a red ocean, the industry boundaries are strictly defined, they're accepted by everyone, and the competitive rules of the game are well known.
And the reason they use the term red oceans is to evoke the visual of cutthroat competition. In these spaces, companies are constantly trying to outperform their rivals just to grab a slightly greater share of an existing finite pool of demand.
A shrinking pie.
Exactly. But as the market space gets crowded, because inevitably supply eventually exceeds demand, the prospects for profits and growth just shrink.
Products just become commodities, right?
Yeah, and the intense competition literally turns the water bloody, hence the red ocean.
The way I've always thought about it is that competing in a red ocean is like playing a highly violent, rigged game of musical chairs, where the chairs just keep shrinking.
That is a great analogy.
The music stops, and everyone is throwing elbows, fighting over the exact same tiny slice of the pie. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the blue oceans.
Right, which denote all the industries that do not exist today.
This is the unknown market space. Blue oceans are defined by untapped demand and the opportunity for highly profitable, rapid growth. And the crucial distinction here is that in a blue ocean, competition is entirely irrelevant.
Because the rules of the game haven't even been set yet.
Exactly.
What is genuinely staggering, though, when you look at the landscape of business education and corporate consulting, is how much time, energy, and billions of dollars are spent analyzing those red oceans.
Oh, it's almost all of it.
Yeah, for the past 25 to 30 years, the dominant focus of strategy work has almost entirely been on competition-based red ocean strategies. We have endless, complex economic models on how to analyze the structure of an existing industry.
How to benchmark your competitors.
Right, how to carve out a fraction of a percent of cost advantage. But historically, there has been almost no practical, systematic guidance on how to actually create a blue ocean.
It's always been treated as this mysterious dark art or just a byproduct of sheer dumb luck.
Exactly.
And that reliance on luck ties into something I want to push back on, or at least question, regarding the business literature we all grew up reading.
Okay, lay it on me.
If you look at massive foundational bestsellers, books like Built to Last or In Search of Excellence, the core assumption is always that we need to study the excellent company.
Right.
The idea is that if we figure out what makes a specific company permanently great, We can just, copy their DNA.
That is the traditional approach, yes. The
And-
company itself is treated as the basic unit of analysis.
Yeah.
We assume there's this class of visionary companies that just continuously magically outperform the market year after year, decade after decade.
Right.
But the authors of our source material utterly deconstruct this myth. If you look at the data objectively, there is absolutely no such thing as a permanently excellent company.
Wait, I have to stop you there. None. Not even the titans, like Apple,
Yeah,
Microsoft.
none. They all stumble, and they all have periods of massive stagnation. Look at the companies profiled in Search of Excellence.
Okay.
Within just a few years of that book's publication, 2/3 of the identified model firms had fallen from their perches as industry leaders.
Oh, 2/3.
Yeah. Companies like Atari or Data General, which were held up as the gold standard, completely slipped into oblivion.
That's wild.
And even with Built to Last, later rigorous academic analysis showed that much of the success attributed to those so-called visionary companies was actually just the result of their overall industry sector performing well at the time.
Oh, so a rising tide lifts all boats, basically.
Exactly. It wasn't the inherent brilliance of the companies themselves. A company can be hailed as a genius organization one moment and be entirely wrong-headed the next.
So, if studying the company as a whole is the wrong lens, and studying the industry is the wrong lens because industries rise and fall, what are we supposed to be looking at? What is the actual unit of measurement for success?
The true unit of analysis is what the authors call the strategic move.
Okay, the strategic move.
Right. A strategic move is the specific set of managerial actions and decisions involved in making a major market-creating business offering. You don't judge the permanent state of the organization, you judge the specific move they made at a specific time.
Let's ground that. What does a strategic move actually look like in practice, divorced from the legacy of the company that made it?
A perfect example is Compaq in the 1990s.
Oh, wow, Compaq. That's a blast from the past.
Right. Now, Compaq was eventually acquired by Hewlett-Packard in 2001, and the brand essentially ceased to exist as an independent powerhouse.
Yeah, they kind of faded out.
Because of that ultimate fate, a lot of traditional business analysts might label Compaq as a failed or unsuccessful company in the long run. But that final outcome does not invalidate the absolutely brilliant strategic moves Compaq made in the mid-90s when they essentially created the multi-billion-dollar server industry.
They created that space.
Yeah. They saw a gap between high-end mini computers and low-end personal computers, and they created a completely new space. The corporate entity known as Compaq may have faded, but that specific strategic move unlocked a massive blue ocean that changed computing forever.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. You isolate the specific action, like the server play, and study the mechanics of that, rather than trying to figure out if Compaq's HR policies in 1998 made them a visionary company.
Exactly.
But making a move like that requires a fundamental shift in how you view economics, right?
It does. It requires you to actively unlearn the most sacred foundational rule of traditional business strategy. And that rule is the value-cost trade-off.
Right, the value-cost trade-off. For anyone who hasn't taken an Econ 101 class recently, this is the dogmatic idea that you basically have two levers in business.
Yep.
You can either create greater value for your customers at a much higher cost to yourself, or you can create reasonable, acceptable value at a lower cost.
Exactly.
You choose to be a high-end luxury brand like Rolex, or you choose to be a budget discount brand like Casio. The universe says you absolutely cannot be both.
Precisely. In the red ocean, strategy is viewed as making a hard, painful choice between differentiation and low cost. But blue ocean strategists completely reject that premise.
They don't buy it at all.
No, they follow a different logic entirely. They pursue what is called value innovation. And value innovation is the simultaneous pursuit of drastic differentiation and massive low cost.
But how does that actually work in the real world? It sounds like a paradox.
Yeah.
How do you simultaneously offer something radically better while spending significantly less money to make it?
It sounds impossible until you see it happen.
Well, let's dive into the ultimate historical case study for this, which is Cirque du Soleil. They debut in the 1980s, entering a circus industry that, by all accounts, was fundamentally dying.
It was an incredibly unattractive industry to enter. If you looked at Porter's 5 forces, every warning light was flashing red. Oh, yeah. Supplier power was massive because you needed these famous, high-maintenance star performers to draw crowds. Buyer power was strong. Furthermore, the alternative forms of entertainment were rapidly eroding the customer base.
Like what?
Sporting events, the rise of home video game consoles, and blockbuster movies were just casting a long shadow over the big top.
Oh, that makes sense.
Mhm.
The circus just felt outdated.
On top of that, animal rights groups were actively protesting the treatment of circus animals. Audiences were shrinking rapidly. The industry standard was essentially dominated by Ringling Bros and Barnum and Bailey, with a bunch of smaller, regional players offering scaled-down Me Too versions of the exact same experience.
It was a completely bloody red ocean. If Guy Laliberté, the founder of Cirque, had followed traditional strategy, he would have just tried to compete. He would have looked at Ringling Bros and thought, I need a slightly funnier clown, I need a slightly bigger elephant, and I need to spend 10% more on local billboard advertising.
And if he had done that, he would have just raised his costs astronomically without substantially altering the core circus experience, and he wouldn't have increased overall demand. It would have been a fast track to bankruptcy.
So what did he do instead?
Instead, Cirque du Soleil executed value innovation. Let's break down the mechanics of how they simultaneously lowered costs and raised value. First, the cost side. They looked at the traditional circus and entirely eliminated the most expensive elements that the industry took for granted. The biggest one, they got rid of animal acts entirely.
I want to pause on that because getting rid of the animals is a monumental decision.
It really is.
As a consumer, you just think, oh, no lions.
But structurally, the economics of animal acts are insane. You don't just buy an elephant and put it in a tent.
Oh, not even close. You have to feed it specialized diets, you have to hire highly trained handlers, you have to transport a multi-ton animal across the country in specialized trains, and you have to pay astronomical medical bills and liability insurance. By cutting the animals, they didn't just save a little money. They completely severed an enormous bleeding artery of fixed and variable costs.
Exactly. The cost structure plummeted overnight. But they didn't stop there. They also eliminated the high-maintenance star performers.
The famous acrobats and clowns.
Right. They looked at the data and realized something profound. The general public didn't actually care about circus stars the way they cared about Hollywood movie stars.
That's so true. Nobody remembers their name.
Exactly. Nobody was buying a ticket specifically to see a guy named the Great Roberto juggle.
Yeah.
They just wanted to see good juggling. So they stopped paying exorbitant premiums for big names. Furthermore, they dropped the traditional three-ring setup.
Why does the three-ring setup matter?
Because a three-ring circus requires you to hire triple the number of performers just to fill the visual space. And frankly, it actually gives the audience a headache because they don't know where to look.
Yeah, it's sensory overload.
Right. By moving to a single ring, they slashed their performer payroll by roughly 2/3 and created a more intimate, focused experience.
Okay, so they've ruthlessly slashed their costs. But if you only slash costs, you just become a cheap, stripped-down, depressing circus.
Absolutely.
You have to increase the value simultaneously.
Right. And they did this by injecting elements from the theater. They added intellectual, overarching storylines to the shows.
Like an actual narrative.
Exactly. They composed original artistic music. Instead of playing generic brass band marches, they elevated the environment. Instead of sawdust and hard wooden benches, they created refined, luxurious tent environments that felt like attending a grand epic.
It feels like an event, not just a tent in a parking lot.
And crucially, they created multiple distinct productions. Traditionally, a circus had one show that toured for years. Cirque created multiple different shows, which meant you could go see Mystère one year and the next year exactly like you would go see different Broadway plays.
They completely redefined the problem itself. They stopped trying to compete with Ringling Bros for the attention of children. Instead, they targeted adults and corporate clients.
Exactly.
These were people who were already conditioned to paying theater and opera prices, which were several times higher than a traditional $10 circus ticket. So they achieved massive differentiation through the theatrical artistic elements, and they achieved unprecedented low costs by eliminating the animals, the stars, and the multiple rings. Value innovation.
And to help companies visualize how this actually happens, the authors introduce a really brilliant diagnostic tool called the strategy canvas and the value curve.
Okay, let's break that down.
If you want to understand your industry, you have to map it. Picture a basic two-dimensional graph. The horizontal axis maps out the specific factors that an industry currently competes on.
So for the traditional circus, what are those factors?
The points on that horizontal axis would be things like animal shows, star performers, aisle concessions, thrills and danger, and multiple rings.
Got it.
The vertical axis maps the offering level, meaning how much a company invests in that specific factor. A high score means you invest a lot of money and effort into it. A low score means you invest very little.
I absolutely love the analogy of an audio equalizer for this. The graphic equalizer on an old stereo system with all the little physical sliders.
Yes.
The strategy canvas is your industry's equalizer. The horizontal axis is the different frequency bands, like bass, mid, treble, and the vertical axis is how high you push the slider for each band.
That's a perfect mental model. And when you plot the current offerings of competitors across these factors, you draw a line connecting all the sliders. That line is your value curve.
Right.
What you inevitably find when you map a red ocean is that all the competitors have essentially the exact same basic shape to their value curve.
Right. In a red ocean, every single competitor's equalizer settings look identical. The budget players might have all their sliders pushed down to a 3 out of 10, and the premium luxury players might have all their sliders pushed up to a 9 out of 10. But the overall shape, the strategic profile, marches in total lockstep.
Exactly. Everyone is just trying to be a slightly louder or slightly quieter version of the exact same song.
But visualizing the trap of the red ocean is only step one. The real challenge is figuring out how to break the equalizer. How do you decide which sliders to yank all the way down to zero and which completely new sliders to invent so you could draw a completely new blue ocean curve?
Which brings us to the operational core of the entire philosophy, the ultimate diagnostic tool, the 4 actions framework, also known as the ERRC grid.
ERRC?
Yes, ERRC. This framework forces you to ask 4 brutal, fundamental questions that challenge an industry's strategic logic.
Okay, what are the 4 questions?
The 4 questions are, first, which of the factors that the industry takes for granted should be eliminated entirely? Second, which factors should be reduced well below the industry standard? Third, which factors should be raised well above the industry standard? And fourth, which factors should be created that the industry has never offered before?
I want to walk through this ERRC grid, eliminate, reduce, raise, create. Using an industry that is notoriously snobby, deeply entrenched, and bound by centuries of tradition. The wine industry.
Oh, this is a great one.
Specifically, the United States wine market in the late 1990s.
It was a massive, bloody red ocean. At the time, you had over 1,600 different wineries fiercely competing for shelf space.
1,600?
Over 1,600. And what were they competing on? They were competing on prestige, the aging quality of the wine, the complexity of the tannins, the awards they won at festivals, and incredibly dense, intimidating, inosological terminology on their labels.
It was an echo chamber. The competitors were solely benchmarking each other, trying to out-prestige one another.
Yeah.
But then you have Casella Wines, an Australian winery. Instead of looking at what the other 1,600 wineries were doing, they decided to look entirely outside the wine industry. They looked at the alternatives.
Right.
They looked at the massive, booming market of beer drinkers and ready-to-drink cocktail consumers. And what they discovered by talking to those people was a complete revelation.
They realized that the vast majority of American adults actually saw wine as a turnoff. It was deeply intimidating. It was pretentious.
Confusing.
Very confusing. And frankly, the complex, dry, heavy taste profiles that the industry prided itself on and spent millions trying to perfect were actually really difficult for the average person to appreciate or even enjoy. The industry was spending a fortune to create a flavor profile that the mass market actively disliked.
So Casella takes out a blank equalizer, the strategy canvas, and they run the 4 actions framework to create a new brand, Yellowtail. Let's look at how they move their sliders. First, what did they eliminate?
They entirely eliminated the aging process. They stopped putting wine in expensive oak barrels for years. They also eliminated the confusing, inecological jargon on the bottle. They realized the average consumer didn't care about the historical legacy of the vineyard soil.
The cost savings there are staggering. Eliminating aging means you don't have millions of dollars of inventory just sitting in a dark room, tying up your working capital.
Yeah.
You make the wine, you ship it, you get paid.
Yeah.
Okay, second question. What do they reduce?
They dramatically reduced the complexity of the wine itself, and they reduced the range of options. Instead of overwhelming buyers with a portfolio of 30 different varietals, like a Merlot, a Cabernet, a Zinfandel, a Pinot Noir, they launched with just 2, a red Shiraz and a white Chardonnay.
Again, think of the operational efficiency. Reducing to 2 wines means your manufacturing lines are incredibly streamlined. Your inventory management is simple. They even use the exact same physical bottle shape for both the red and the white wine, which meant they didn't have to retool their bottling machines. They drove their cost structure into the floor. But you can't just be cheap. So, third question, what did they raise?
They raised retail store involvement. In the traditional wine industry, wineries focused all their marketing on the consumer through expensive magazine ads. Casella focused on the clerks working the registers at the local liquor stores.
Wait, really? The clerks?
Yeah, they gave these clerks Australian Outback hats and oilskin jackets. They turned the retail workers into enthusiastic, authentic ambassadors for the brand, largely because Yellowtail was finally a wine that the clerks didn't feel intimidated recommending to a casual shopper.
And finally, the fourth question, what did they create?
They created an easy-drinking, sweet, fruity flavor profile that appealed immediately to someone used to drinking a Bud Light or a margarita. There were no harsh tannins, and they created a fun, adventurous, totally unintimidating brand identity.
The kangaroo.
Exactly. The label was black with a simple, brightly colored jumping kangaroo. There was no chateau, no family crest, no cursive font, just a kangaroo.
The result of this value innovation was staggering. Without any massive promotional campaigns, without Super Bowl ads, Yellowtail leapfrogged the entire industry. They didn't just steal market share from the French or Californian wines. They actually grew the total size of the market.
Yes.
They brought millions of non-wine drinkers, the beer and cocktail crowd, into the fold. Within 2 years, Yellowtail became the fastest-growing brand in the history of the U.S. wine industry.
It is a structurally perfect strategy, and the authors point out that when you look at a successful value curve like Yellowtail's or Southwest Airlines, which, offered the speed of an airplane at the price of a bus ticket by cutting meals and VIP lounges.
Yeah, another great example.
They all share 3 distinct observable traits. A good strategy must have focus, divergence, and a compelling tagline.
Let's define those. Focus means what?
Focus means the value curve doesn't diffuse its efforts across every single factor. You aren't trying to be all things to all people. You push a few specific sliders very high, and you ruthlessly pull the rest down to 0.
Right, and divergence.
Divergence means the actual visual shape of your curve on the canvas stands entirely apart from the competition. You aren't just a parallel line slightly above your rival. Your line zigs while theirs zags.
And the third one, a compelling tagline.
A compelling tagline means the strategy is so clear that it can be translated into a simple, authentic message. For Southwest, it was essentially the speed of a plane at the price of a car whenever you need it. For Yellowtail, it's a fun, simple wine to be enjoyed every day.
So practically speaking, how does a listener apply this right now? Let's say I'm running a mid-sized logistics company, or I'm managing a software team. How can I tell if my own strategy is broken just by looking at my current value curve?
You have to know how to read the strategy canvas. Let's say you get your team in a room and you honestly plot your company's value curve against your competitors. If your line looks like a bowl of spaghetti just zigzagging up and down across the factors with no rhyme or reason, your strategy is fundamentally incoherent.
What does that usually indicate about the company internally? Like, why does it look like spaghetti?
It almost always indicates that the organization is operating in isolated silos. The marketing department is pushing one slider up, the engineering department is pushing another slider down, the finance department is doing its own thing, and there is absolutely no unified strategic vision connecting them.
So everyone's fighting each other.
Exactly. It's a localized optimization that results in a global mess.
Okay. But what if my curve doesn't look like spaghetti? What if I draw my curve and it just runs incredibly high across every single factor? We have the best product, the most features, the best customer service, the highest quality materials, the most aggressive marketing. I mean, surely that's a winning strategy.
Actually, that is one of the most dangerous red flags of all.
Really? Why?
If your curve delivers high levels across all factors, but you do not currently possess dominant market share and incredibly high profitability, it means you are severely oversupplying and over-engineering.
Oh, wow.
You are giving your customers too much of what adds only incremental marginal value, and the costs required to maintain all those high sliders are likely bleeding your company dry.
So you're spending money on things people don't actually value enough to pay for.
Exactly. It means you desperately, urgently need to run the ERRC grid and figure out what to eliminate and reduce. You are suffocating yourself with excellence that nobody actually wants to pay for.
Okay, so we've established the equalizer. We have the ultimate diagnostic tool in the ERRC grid. We know how to read the canvas. But here is the massive question. Where do we actually look for the inspiration to fill it out?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because it is very easy to sit in a studio and say, just create a blue ocean, just invent a new curve. It's entirely another thing to be sitting in a fluorescent lit conference room on a Tuesday morning and actually spot one in the wild. How do we find these new boundaries?
To find those boundaries, the authors mapped out what they call the 6 paths framework. The core philosophy here is that to break out of a red ocean, you absolutely cannot look within the accepted boundaries of your industry.
So stop staring at your direct competitors.
Exactly. If you only look at what your direct competitors are doing, you will only ever come up with incremental improvements. You must look systematically across conventional boundaries.
Let's start with the first concept, looking across alternative industries. And before we dive into the examples, we need to clarify a massive point of confusion in business strategy, which is the difference between an alternative and a substitute.
This is critical. Substitutes are products or services that have different forms but offer the exact same core function.
Give me an example.
For example, if you are a small business owner and you want to manage your company's finances, you can use a software program like QuickBooks, you can hire a human CPA, or you can literally use a pencil and a physical ledger. Those are substitutes. They look different, but functionally, they are all doing the exact same math.
Right, but alternatives are different. Alternatives have different functions, and they have different forms, but they serve the exact same overarching objective for the buyer.
Yes.
The classic example is going out for the evening. You can go to a movie theater, or you can go to a fine dining restaurant. Functionally, they are completely different. One is visual, narrative entertainment in a dark room. The other is gastronomical conversational pleasure in a lit room.
But they serve the exact same objective.
Exactly, enjoying a night out to relax. And the insight here is that buyers implicitly weigh these alternatives in their heads all the time.
Yeah.
But companies almost never do.
Think about the corporate travel market and the brilliant move made by NetJets, the company that pioneered fractional jet ownership. They didn't look at how to build a slightly better commercial airline, and they didn't look at how to build a slightly cheaper private jet. They looked across the alternatives and asked a very simple question.
Which was?
Why do corporations choose commercial airlines over private jets?
Well, let's unpack the economics of that. Why do they? It's all about cost. Buying a corporate Gulfstream is a $30 million fixed cost up front. Then you have to put a pilot and a co-pilot on a 6-figure retainer. You have to pay exorbitant hangar fees at the airport. You have to pay for specialized maintenance.
It adds up fast.
And the worst part is the deadhead costs. If you fly executives from New York to LA and they stay there for a week, that $30 million asset is sitting empty on the tarmac, or you pay to fly an empty plane back. It is massively inefficient.
Right.
Commercial airlines avoid all of that. You only pay for the specific ticket you need when you need it.
Exactly. NetJets understood that alternative perfectly. Then they asked the flip side. Okay, then why do corporations choose private jets over commercial airlines? Why spend the $30 million?
Because commercial airlines are a logistical nightmare. You have to arrive 2 hours early. You have to go through security theater. You are constrained by the airline's hub and spoke model.
Right, the hubs.
Meaning if you need to get to a manufacturing plant in a small town in Ohio, you have to fly into a major hub, wait 3 hours for a connection, and then rent a car. A private jet gives you ultimate speed, dramatic reduction in travel time, and point-to-point travel to thousands of tiny regional airports directly next to your final destination.
So NetJets looked at both alternatives and offered the decisive advantages of both while eliminating the pain points. They offered fractional ownership. You buy 1/16 of an aircraft.
Oh, I see.
You get the speed, the privacy, and the point-to-point convenience of a private jet. But because you share the asset, you operate at a low fixed cost and a low variable cost that is actually comparable to first-class commercial travel when you factor in hotel stays and lost executive time.
That's brilliant.
They completely eliminated the hangar fees and the deadhead cost for the buyer. It was a massive blue ocean that devastated traditional corporate first-class travel.
Another amazing example of looking across alternatives is NTT Docomo's i-mode in Japan in the late 90s. They look across the alternatives of mobile phones and the PC internet. Now, the PC internet had infinite information, but the PC itself was hugely expensive. It took 5 minutes to boot up, and it lacked any mobility. You were chained to a desk.
And the mobile phone.
The mobile phone was highly mobile and great for voice, but it lacked any data. Now, the telecommunications industry in the West tried to solve this by cramming the entire PC internet onto a tiny phone screen using WAP protocols. It was a disaster. It was slow, unreadable, and expensive.
But Docomo didn't do that. They didn't try to merge the two technologies completely. They just took the specific killer apps of the internet, the things people actually used, like email, weather, and simple news headlines, and put them on a phone accessed by one simple eye mode button.
Just giving people what they actually wanted.
They combined the mobility and instant-on capability of a cell phone with the core functional utility of the internet, completely bypassing the slow boot up and high cost of a PC. They hit the exact sweet spot between the two alternatives.
Okay, so that's looking across alternatives. But what if you want to look inside your own industry? That brings us to looking across strategic groups. Now, strategic groups are basically categories of companies within an industry that pursue similar strategies, and they are usually ranked by price and performance.
Like luxury versus economy.
Right? Think about the automotive industry. You have the luxury car group like Mercedes, BMW, and the economy car group like Honda, Hyundai. The trick to finding a blue ocean here is to look at why buyers choose to trade up or trade down between these specific groups. My absolute favorite example of this is Curves, the fitness franchise for women.
Curves is a masterclass in this specific path. Let's look at the U.S. fitness industry at the time. It basically consisted of two main strategic groups. On one end, you had traditional health clubs.
The big ones?
These were expensive, giant facilities located in premium urban centers. They had juice bars, swimming pools, saunas, endless rows of complicated machines, and honestly, a lot of intimidatingly fit people walking around in spandex.
Yeah.
You traded up to these expensive clubs because working out collectively with other people is highly motivating, and the equipment was state-of-the-art.
Right. And on the other end of the spectrum, the other strategic group was home exercise videos.
Yeah.
Jane Fonda, Tebow, these were incredibly cheap, highly private, and required absolutely zero travel time. You traded down to these for convenience and privacy.
So Curves looked at why women traded up to the gym and why they traded down to the living room, and they found the Goldilocks zone. They combined the low cost and privacy of the home workout with the social motivation of the traditional club.
But here's where I want to push back a little bit, because this is where the theory sounds dangerous in practice. Curves didn't just borrow elements, they actively destroyed the sacred cows of the gym industry.
They really did.
They actively eliminated mirrors on the walls. They eliminated men entirely. They eliminated the juice bar, the showers, and the complex weights. Isn't it incredibly risky to alienate the core demographic of the fitness industry, the hardcore gym rats, by taking away the very things the industry has spent decades telling them they should want?
That is exactly the point, and it's where most companies fail. They are too terrified to alienate the core demographic. But the traditional gym rats are the red ocean. They are already fighting over the benches at Gold's Gym. If you want to create a blue ocean, you aren't trying to please the core demographic of the existing industry. You are trying to aggregate a completely new mass of people who actively hated the core demographic's rules.
The non-consumers.
Exactly. When Curves actually talked to the mass of average women, they realized these women didn't want to be stared at by men while they worked out. They didn't want to feel inadequate standing in front of wall-to-wall mirrors. And they certainly didn't have 2 hours to spend navigating complex machines and waiting in line for a shower.
They just wanted a quick workout.
Right. By eliminating all of that, Curves dropped their startup costs to an absolute fraction of a traditional gym. You could open a Curves franchise for like $25,000 instead of $1 million.
Wow, that's a massive difference.
Because the costs were so low, they could put locations in cheap suburban strip malls right next to grocery stores, making it ultra convenient. They charged only $30 a month, and they unlocked a massive blue ocean of millions of women who had previously abandoned the idea of a gym entirely.
I love that. The mirrors weren't a feature, they were a bug. Which leads perfectly into another way to reframe your perspective. It's not just about looking at different industries or different groups. Sometimes you have to completely change who you are looking at in the buying chain.
In almost every industry, there is a chain of buyers involved in a transaction. It's rarely just one person. You have the purchasers, the people who actually sign the check. You have the users, the people who actually operate the product. And you have the influencers, the experts who recommend the product.
Okay, so purchaser, user, influencer.
And over time, industries almost always converge on focusing all their marketing and R&D on just one of these groups.
But if you intentionally shift that focus to a different link in the chain, you can find massive unexploited value. Look at Novo Nordisk in the pharmaceutical industry.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
For decades, the insulin industry focused exclusively on the influencers, meaning the doctors. Because doctors are the ones making the prescribing decisions, the entire industry competed on one metric: creating pure and pure insulin to impress the medical professionals. But Novo Nordisk did something radical. They shifted their focus away from the doctors and looked directly at the users, the actual diabetic patients.
And when they looked at the patients, they realized the biggest pain point in their daily lives wasn't the chemical purity of the insulin. The purity was already fine. The real pain point was the daily, humiliating, incredibly inconvenient hassle of having to carry around fragile glass vials and medical syringes.
Like having to measure out doses in public restrooms.
Exactly. It made them feel like sick patients. So Novo Nordisk created the Novo Pen. It was a device that looked exactly like a premium fountain pen. It carried a week's worth of insulin in a cartridge, and it had a simple click mechanism for dosing.
It entirely eliminated the social stigma of syringes. By focusing on the user's emotional and practical needs rather than the doctor's clinical needs, Novo Nordisk transformed themselves from a mere chemical insulin producer into a comprehensive diabetes care company, and they completely dominated the market.
Bloomberg did the exact same thing in the financial information industry. Before Bloomberg, companies like Reuters and Telerate sold their financial data systems to the purchasers.
Which in a bank would be who?
The IT manager. And what do IT managers value? Standardized systems, low cost, and easy maintenance. So the industry provided exactly that. But Mike Bloomberg realized that the users, the actual traders and analysts sitting on the floor, were the ones making or losing millions of dollars a day.
So Bloomberg bypassed the IT managers and designed a system specifically for the traders. They gave them dual screens, which was unheard of at the time. They built custom keyboards with familiar financial terms on the keys instead of standard QWERTY layouts.
Which sped everything up for them.
Massively. They built in massive analytic capabilities so traders didn't have to download raw data, print it out, and use a pencil and a calculator to figure out historical returns. They even added lifestyle purchases into the terminal, like the ability to order flower delivery, because they knew traders worked insane 14-hour days and forgot their anniversaries.
That's brilliant.
The terminal was wildly expensive, but the users demanded Bloomberg so fiercely that the IT purchasers were forced to comply and buy it.
It's all about finding the ignored link in the chain. And this logic extends to the products themselves. Very few products or services are used in a complete vacuum. You have to look at what happens before, during, and after your product is used. This is the path of looking across complementary products and services. You have to find the hidden pain points.
This one is absolutely massive for B2B companies. Look at NABI, the Hungarian bus company that was trying to sell to U.S. municipal transit properties.
Right, city buses.
The entire municipal bus industry competed on one extremely rigid metric: offering the lowest initial purchase price for a bus. City governments have tight budgets, so the lowest bidder wins. But ABI realized the true cost for the buyers wasn't the initial price tag on day one. A municipal bus stays in circulation for 12 years. The real pain points, the things that were bleeding the cities dry, were what happened after the purchase.
They looked at the complementary life cycle costs: fuel consumption, heavy wear and tear on the axles, and most importantly, rust and panel replacement. Because these buses operated in cities with snow and salt, the steel frames rusted out.
Just corroded away.
And if a bus got into a minor traffic accident, the city had to replace an entire massive steel side panel, which took the bus out of commission for weeks.
So NDI made a radical move. They completely stopped competing on initial price. In fact, they made their buses more expensive up front, but they built them out of fiberglass instead of steel.
Which is a huge structural change.
Huge. Now, why fiberglass? It's lighter, which drastically cuts fuel consumption and allows you to use fewer axles and lighter brakes. But crucially, fiberglass does not rust. And if a fiberglass bus gets into an accident, you don't have to replace the whole side. You literally just cut out the damaged fiberglass section with a saw, solder a new piece in, and the bus is back on the street the next morning.
It dramatically reduced the complementary life cycle maintenance costs. Even though the initial purchase price was noticeably higher, municipalities flocked to them because the total cost of ownership over 12 years was vastly cheaper. They solved the hidden pain point.
Another great, slightly more everyday example is Philips tea kettles in Britain. The kettle industry in the UK was completely stagnant. Profit margins were razor thin. But Philips realized the problem wasn't the design of the kettle, it was the complementary product. It was the tap water.
Right, the water itself.
British tap water has a very high concentration of lime scale. When you boil it, the scale flakes off and ends up floating in people's tea, which is disgusting. So Philips didn't reinvent the heating element, they just snapped a simple plastic mouth filter onto the spout of the kettle to catch the scale as you poured. Boom. Massive sales spike. They solved the water problem to sell the kettle problem.
Sometimes the boundary you need to cross isn't physical or functional, sometimes it's psychological. Over time, industries tend to train their customers to expect either a purely functional, price-driven appeal or an emotional, feelings-driven appeal. If you challenge that deeply ingrained orientation, you can find entirely new space.
Let's talk about QB House in Japan. The traditional Japanese barbershop was a highly emotional, deeply ingrained cultural ritual. You went in, you got hot towels applied to your face, you got shoulder rubs, they served you tea and coffee, they did special hair and scalp treatments. It was a whole production.
It sounds lovely, but time-consuming.
Exactly. It cost something like 3,000 to 5,000 yen, and you had to wait forever because each haircut took an hour. The industry competed on who could offer the most emotional pampering.
But QB House realized that modern working professionals in Tokyo didn't actually want an hour-long ritual in the middle of a busy workday. They just wanted to get their hair cut. So QB House ruthlessly stripped out all the emotional elements. No hot towels, no massages, no tea. They even eliminated the most time-consuming part of the functional process, the wash and dry practice at the sink.
Wait, how do you cut hair without washing it to get the clippings off?
They invented an air wash system. It was essentially a specialized overhead vacuum hose that the barber pulled down to instantly vacuum the cut-off hair right off your head.
Oh, wow.
By eliminating the emotional rituals and optimizing the functionality, they reduced the haircut to exactly 10 minutes. They charged just 1,000 yen, about $9 US. They even added a functional traffic light system outside the shop, red, yellow, green, so you knew instantly if there was a wait without even walking inside.
That's so smart.
They shifted an entire industry from emotional pampering to highly functional efficiency, and their revenues per hour per barber skyrocketed because they were churning through so many clients.
And on the exact flip side, you have Cemex, one of the world's largest cement producers, operating in Mexico. They did the exact opposite. They shifted from functional to emotional.
Cement is usually pretty functional.
Most cement in Mexico was sold in retail bags to very poor families who were trying to slowly build room additions onto their homes. It was a purely functional, heavy, dusty commodity. But these families rarely had the structured savings to actually buy enough materials at once because their extra money was always being siphoned off to pay for community festivals, weddings, sweet 16s, and baptisms. Emotional milestone events always took priority over the functional need for cement.
So Cemex realized they couldn't compete as a functional commodity against weddings. They had to make cement emotional. They created the Patrimonio Hoy program. They leveraged a traditional Mexican community savings scheme called a tanda. In a tanda, a group of people pool their money every week, and one person wins the pot.
Okay.
Cemex created super tandas, but the twist was the weekly winner didn't get a pile of cash. They got the exact cement and building materials needed to finish an entire room, delivered directly by Cemex. And Cemex included technical advice, architectural plans, and even threw a community party to celebrate the finished room.
They completely reframed it. They turned a boring, functional bag of gray dust into the emotional gift of a dream room for your family. Demand absolutely soared, and because the tandas locked in weekly payments, Cemex's revenue growth became highly predictable in a market that used to be incredibly volatile.
Which brings us to a critical dimension, looking across time, or more accurately, looking at trends. But the authors offer a massive warning here. You shouldn't just project a current trend linearly into the future. That's what everyone does. You need to look at how a decisive, irreversible trend is actively changing what buyers value.
The classic example of this is Apple's iTunes at the turn of the millennium. Apple looked at the explosion of illegal digital music sharing, like Napster, LimeWire, Kazaa. The recording industry was trying to fight this trend with lawsuits, trying to force people back to buying $19 plastic CDs.
Which was a losing battle.
Completely. But Apple saw that the trend of digital sharing was absolutely irreversible. People wanted digital music on their computers, and they fundamentally hated being forced to buy an entire album just to get the one-hit song they actually liked.
However, Apple also saw that illegal sharing was fraught with annoyances. It was full of terrible sound quality, dead download links, mislabeled tracks, computer viruses, and the looming threat of corporate lawsuits.
It was a mess.
Apple capitalized on the irreversible digital trend by creating the iTunes Store. High quality, perfectly legal, 99-cent a la carte downloads. They gave the buyers the unbundled flexibility they craved, but they solved all the massive annoyances of piracy. They created a massive blue ocean by aligning with the trend but removing its pain points.
Okay, let's take a step back here. When you and I sit here and talk through these examples, NetJets, Curves, Yellowtail, iTunes, CMEX, they honestly seem incredibly obvious in hindsight.
Right, 2020 vision.
Like, of course you should just eliminate the expensive stuff people don't care about. Of course you should give traders better keyboards. Why don't more companies do this? If the logic is this sound, why is 99% of the corporate world still stuck in the red ocean fighting over pennies?
It's a great question, and the answer lies deep in corporate bureaucracy. The reason they don't do this is because the traditional corporate planning process is almost perfectly, maliciously designed to kill blue ocean ideas before they even start.
Also,
Think about how a typical strategic plan is built at a Fortune 500 company. The executives at the top demand a plan. So the middle managers spend 3 months building massive spreadsheets. They compile historical data, they do competitive benchmarking to show how they compare to the rival across the street, and they propose tactical, incremental red ocean moves.
if we cut marketing by 2%, we can increase our margin by 0.5%.
Exactly. The final document is a 100-page binder full of numbers that no one deep in the company actually understands or believes in. It's a purely quantitative exercise that completely ignores the qualitative reality of the market. To fix this, you have to completely blow up the planning process. You must focus on the big picture, not the numbers.
The authors call this visualizing strategy, and they outline a radically different 4-step process for corporate planning. Let's walk through this using the case study of EFS European Financial Services. This was a 150-year-old company. They had a deeply divided, siloed culture, and they were stuck in a completely stagnant market. They were the epitome of a red ocean company.
The first step in fixing a company like that is visual awakening. You have to force the executives to actually draw their current as-is strategy canvas. For EFS, they split the management into 2 teams, one for their traditional offline business and one for their newer online business. And the process was agonizing.
I can imagine.
They spent days arguing because they couldn't even agree on what the specific factors were that they supposedly competed on.
That right there is terrifying. The executives running the company don't even agree on what the company does.
Exactly. But when they finally managed to draw the canvases, it was a brutal wake-up call. They realized their online and offline curves both lacked any strategic focus. Worse, their curves were virtually identical to their competitors' curves. And when asked to provide a compelling tagline for their strategy, neither team could come up with anything coherent.
It's the moment you realize your equalizer settings look exactly like everyone else's. It shatters the corporate illusion of superiority. So that painful realization leads to step 2, visual exploration. Now that you know you are stuck, you have to figure out how to escape. And the authors are incredibly adamant about this rule. Never, ever outsource your eyes.
What they mean is, do not rely on market research reports generated by third-party consultants. Do not look at aggregated survey data. You have to send your actual managers out into the field to observe customers and, crucially, to observe non-customers. When the EFS managers were forced out of their offices and into the field, they had a massive realization. For years, the company had prided itself on their highly paid account relationship managers. They thought this was their key differentiator.
But when they actually talked to the corporate buyers, they found out the buyers actively hated the relationship managers.
Yeah, they couldn't stand them.
The buyers viewed them purely as relationship savers, people who only showed up to apologize and fix errors after the bank messed up a transaction. What the buyers actually wanted wasn't a nice dinner with a banker. They wanted rapid, flawless transaction confirmation. They just wanted an email saying their millions of dollars transferred successfully.
This revelation brings us to step 3, the visual strategy fair. The management teams come back from the field and they draw new to-be curves based on everything they learn. But instead of hiding these in a binder, EFS pinned these massive new canvases to the walls of a conference room. And they brought in a room full of external judges, actual clients, non-customers, and even industry outsiders.
And the format is crucial here. They didn't do a 2-hour, 100-slide PowerPoint presentation filled with financial projections. They got exactly 10 minutes to pitch the logic of the new curve. And then the judges voted by literally walking up to the wall and sticking Post-it notes on the curves they thought were best.
It completely democratizes the process and removes the toxic internal politics from the planning phase. You can't hide a bad idea behind a complex spreadsheet. The winning strategy for EFS was profound and controversial. Based on the voting, they decided to eliminate relationship managers for all but the absolute top-tier accounts. They massively reduced the number of account executives.
Wow, just cut them right out.
And they took all that saved money and heavily raised the ease of use, creating online tracking and automatic confirmation systems. They basically transformed from a traditional schmoozing bank into the FedEx of corporate foreign exchange.
And step 4 is visual communication. How do you get a 10,000-person company to actually execute this? Again, you don't hand out a 50-page manifesto. You distribute a simple one-page document to every single employee. On that page is the before picture of the old strategy canvas and the after picture of the new blue ocean canvas.
It's a visual contract.
Right. That single piece of paper becomes the literal litmus test for every decision in the company. If the IT department wants a $5 million budget for a new software project, they have to point to the new value curve and explain exactly how this software helps push a specific slider up or pull a specific slider down. If it doesn't fit the curve, it doesn't get funded.
As part of this big picture focus, the authors also introduce a fantastic mental model for assessing your overall company, the PMS map. That stands for Pioneers, Migrators, and Settlers. This is how you test the true growth potential of a business portfolio rather than just looking at current cash flow.
Break those down for us.
Settlers are your Me Too businesses. They completely conform to the industry standard. Their value curve matches the competition exactly. Now, these might be your cash cows today, they might be generating great revenue, but their future growth potential is effectively dead because they are stuck in a red ocean.
Okay, what about migrators?
Migrators are a step up. They offer better value than the competition, but they don't offer true groundbreaking innovation. They are just a slightly better version of the status quo. And pioneers are your true blue oceans. They offer unprecedented value and break away from the competition entirely.
My favorite analogy for this is imagining you own a thriving, massive chain of video rental stores in the early 2000s, right when Netflix is mailing DVDs and starting to look at streaming. If you only look at your spreadsheets, your business looks absolutely fantastic today. Your margins on late fees are great. You're throwing off tons of cash.
But structurally, you are a settler.
The future is already completely lost. You just don't know it yet because the accounting data is a lagging indicator. You have to aggressively push your portfolio toward pioneers before the red ocean dries up completely.
Exactly. So let's say you've done the work. You've bypassed the spreadsheets, you've visualized your strategy, you've gone to the strategy fair, and you've drawn a brilliant pioneer curve. But who exactly are you selling this new offering to? If you want to maximize the absolute size of your blue ocean, you have to execute another massive paradigm shift. You have to stop obsessing over your current customers.
Which feels entirely backwards. Every business book tells you to obsess over your customer. In traditional red ocean strategy, to grow your market share, a company focuses intently on its existing customers and tries to segment the market finer and finer to meet highly specific needs.
Let's make a slightly different version for left-handed people with small hands.
Right, and another version for left-handed people who like the color blue. But finer segmentation inevitably leads to microscopic, unprofitable target markets.
To maximize a blue ocean, you must do the exact opposite. You must focus on non-customers. And instead of focusing on the tiny differences between buyers, you must build on powerful overarching commonalities. You have to actively desegment the market to aggregate massive demand. The authors define 3 specific tiers of non-customers that you should target.
Let's walk through them. Tier 1 are the soon-to-be non-customers. Who are they?
These are people who sit on the absolute precarious edge of your market. They use your industry's offering right now, but only out of sheer necessity. Mentally, they are already gone, they don't like what you offer, and they're just waiting for a slightly better alternative so they can jump ship immediately.
A brilliant example of capturing Tier 1 is Pret a Manger in the UK. Before Pret existed, working professionals in city centers like London essentially had 2 choices for lunch. They could either go to a sit-down restaurant or they could brown bag a sandwich from home. The restaurant goers were classic Tier 1 non-customers of the restaurant industry. They used restaurants, but they were deeply unhappy about it.
Why were they unhappy? Because sitting down at a restaurant took too long. It ate up their entire lunch break. It was too expensive for a daily meal. And they were increasingly concerned about healthy eating, whereas restaurant food was often heavy. Pret a Manger looked at these soon-to-be non-customers and ignored their differences.
They didn't care if the customer was a banker or a graphic designer.
Exactly. They found 3 powerful commonalities. Everyone wanted food fast, they wanted it fresh and healthy, and they wanted it reasonably priced.
So Pret created a blue ocean by desegmenting. They built a model where restaurant-quality sandwiches were made fresh every single morning in the store's own kitchen, using premium ingredients, but they sold them in a high-speed, grab-and-go supermarket format. There were no waiters. The average customer spends something like 90 seconds in the store.
That's incredibly fast.
They captured all those professionals who were waiting to jump ship from the restaurant industry.
Mm.
And interestingly, because the value curve was so superior, they also captured the brown baggers who decided treating themselves was finally affordable and fast.
Then you have tier 2, the refusing non-customers. These are people who explicitly, consciously consider your market's offering and then actively choose against it because they find it totally unacceptable or unaffordable. The best case study here is JCDecaux, the massive French outdoor advertising company.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Before them, the outdoor advertising industry basically consisted of two things: giant highway billboards or ad placards slapped on the sides of moving city buses.
And a massive amount of corporate advertisers were Tier 2 non-customers. They flat out refused to buy outdoor advertising. Why? Because the exposure time was incredibly short. If a bus drives past you or you drive past a billboard at 65 miles an hour, you have maybe 2 seconds to read it.
Barely enough time to see a logo.
It was completely useless for any company that had a complex message or wanted to run a sophisticated brand campaign. JCDecaux realized that if they could somehow secure stationary, eye-level downtown locations where people actually stopped and lingered, those refusing advertisers would flock to them.
But there is a massive structural barrier there. City municipalities absolutely do not let private companies just bolt ugly commercial billboards onto the downtown sidewalks.
Right, so JCDecaux invented the concept of street furniture. They went to the local governments and made an incredible offer. They said, "We will build beautiful, architecturally stunning bus stops, street kiosks, and public toilets. We will pay for them, we will maintain them, we will wash the glass, and we will do it all entirely for free."
For a cash-strapped municipality, this is a miracle. It saves them millions in infrastructure and maintenance.
But in exchange for this free infrastructure, JCDecaux demanded the exclusive right to place eye-level advertisements inside that furniture. The municipalities got free city upgrades, and JCDecaux unlocked a massive blue ocean of Tier 2 advertisers. Think about it. A person waiting for a bus stands inside that shelter for 5 to 10 minutes.
A completely captive audience.
They have a captive audience. JCDecaux could now charge absolute premium rates for those ads, and their profit margins exploded because they aggregated demand from companies that previously refused to touch outdoor media.
Brilliant. Finally, we have Tier 3, the unexplored non-customers. These are markets that are so completely distant from your industry that no one has ever even thought of them as potential customers. To explain this, we have to look at one of the most complex, expensive products in human history, the Joint Strike Fighter program, which resulted in the F-35 jet.
Oh, military procurement. This is going to be a big one.
The defense aerospace industry is the ultimate example of hypersegmentation. Historically, the U.S. military branches, the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Force operated in total hostile silos when it came to aircraft procurement. They all had completely different, deeply entrenched ideas of what a fighter plane should be.
Because they have different missions.
Right. The Navy insisted on extreme durability. Their planes are literally slamming into the decks of aircraft carriers at high speeds, so they need heavily reinforced landing gear. The Marines needed short takeoff and vertical landing capabilities because they operate off smaller amphibious assault ships and makeshift forward bases. And the Air Force cared almost exclusively about stealth, speed, and maximum agility to penetrate contested airspace.
Because they demanded such specific customized features, the defense contractors built 3 entirely different planes, which meant 3 different R&D budgets, 3 different manufacturing lines, 3 different supply chains for spare parts.
It was astronomically expensive.
But eventually the Pentagon hit a wall. They simply could not afford to keep building 3 entirely bespoke fleets.
So the Joint Strike Fighter program was forced to look at unexplored commonalities across all 3 branches. They actively ignored the intense demands for extreme specialized customization. Instead, they analyzed the underlying cost structure of modern fighter jets. They realized that the physical airframe, the metal, wasn't actually the expensive part. The 2 most astronomically expensive parts of a modern plane are the avionics, the complex software, radar and sensors, and the engine. And crucially, all three branches essentially needed the exact same high-end avionics and engine performance.
So instead of building three highly customized boutique planes, they desegmented the military. They focused on those massive essential commonalities. They built one core airframe with the same avionics and engine, and they combined the necessary elements of stealth, vertical landing, and durability into that single base model.
And what did they tell the branches?
They told the branches, you aren't getting your perfect 100% customized dream plane. You are getting an 80% plane. But by aggregating the demand and creating one massive supply chain, they lowered the estimated cost per plane from around $190 million down to an initial target of $33 million, while still providing a massive leap in overall technological performance.
The lesson is clear. Always go for the largest possible catchment. Finer segmentation shrinks your market and raises costs. Desegmentation unlocks massive latent demand and drives down costs.
Okay, so let's summarize where a company would be at this point. You've mapped your strategy on the canvas. You've used the 6 paths to find a new boundary. You've looked to the 3 tiers of non-customers to ensure your market is massive. You are finally ready to launch the product, right?
Not yet. If you launch now, you might still drown. Before you go to market, you have to systematically de-risk the actual business model. You have to ensure that your brilliant idea can actually survive contact with reality. This is the final principle. Get the strategic sequence right.
The authors lay out a strict 4-step sequence to validate a blue ocean idea. You must assess buyer utility, then price, then cost, and finally adoption. And the rule is absolute. If you fail any single step in this sequence, you cannot proceed. You either have to rethink the idea until it passes, or you park it permanently.
Step 1 is the buyer utility map. The core question here is, does your offering actually unlock exceptional, undeniable utility for the buyer? And we mentioned this earlier, but it is so important it bears repeating. You have to avoid the technology trap.
Yes. Just because a technology is bleeding edge, or just because your engineers think it's incredibly cool, does not mean it offers actual buyer utility. A prime historical example of the technology trap is Philips' CDI console in the 1990s. From an engineering standpoint, it was a marvel. It was a video machine, a music system, a game player, and an interactive teaching tool all crammed into one box.
But the buyers couldn't figure out how to use it. The controller was overly complex, there were barely any good software titles for it, and it was trying to do too many things at once. It lacked a compelling, simple reason to buy it. It completely failed the utility test. Compare that to one of the greatest blue ocean products of all time, the original Ford Model T.
Oh, back to the classics.
Before the Model T, cars were highly customized, bespoke luxury toys for the ultra-rich. They were used for weekend outings, but they broke down constantly. They required expensive mechanics to fix them, and because most roads were dirt, they constantly got stuck in the mud. The Model T didn't offer cutting-edge luxury. It offered massive utility by eliminating the luxury.
It's purely functional.
It came in one color. It was built high off the ground so it could easily drive over muddy, deeply rutted farm roads. And it was designed so simply that any average farmer with a wrench could fix it themselves. It removed the greatest blocks to utility.
Okay, so once you pass the utility test, you move to step 2, strategic pricing. Is your price easily accessible to the mass of target buyers you identified in your non-customer research? Now, I want to ask a question here, because this seems counterintuitive to how modern tech companies operate. Why shouldn't a company just do what Apple does with the Vision Pro or what Tesla did with the original Roadster? Why not start with a super high premium price to skim the rich early adopters, recoup your R&D costs, and then slowly lower the price later for the masses?
In traditional red ocean hardware, that strategy can work. But the authors argue that for blue ocean strategies, particularly today, that is a fatal mistake. And it comes down to 2 modern economic realities: network externalities and non-excludable goods.
Let's break those down. Network externalities basically means the network effect, right?
Right. If you are launching a business like eBay or a social platform, the entire value of your product relies entirely on millions of users being on the platform immediately. Nobody wants to use an auction site with only 10 buyers. You absolutely cannot start with an exclusive high premium price because you will strangle the network before it grows. You have to price for the mass market on day one. Furthermore, blue ocean ideas are very often non-rival and non-excludable goods.
Meaning they are concepts you literally cannot patent or legally protect.
Exactly. You cannot patent the mathematical concept of fractional jet ownership. You cannot patent the layout of a Curves fitness gym. You cannot patent Virgin Atlantic's idea of putting a massage therapist in the upper-class waiting lounge. If you launch an unpatentable idea at a very high price point, you are simply acting as a free, unpaid R&D department for your competitors.
Because they'll just steal it.
They will see your brilliant idea, realize there is massive demand for it, copy the unpatentable concept entirely, and launch it at a mass market price. They will steal your blue ocean. You must establish strategic pricing from the very beginning to capture the mass market so rapidly that imitators can't catch up.
That reality aggressively forces you into step 3. Cost. This is where the math gets brutal. Can you produce your offering at the target cost and still earn a healthy profit margin at that specific strategic price? You cannot do what most companies do, which is cost plus pricing, meaning you figure out how much it costs to make, add 20%, and that's the price. You have to do price minus costing. You set the price first, then you subtract your desired margin, and whatever number is left is your absolute maximum cost limit.
And if you can't hit that target cost with your current operations, you cannot just raise the price. You have to fundamentally innovate your business model. This is exactly why Cirque du Soleil had to drop the animals. It's why NBI had to use fiberglass instead of steel. They innovated their cost structures to hit the target cost at the strategic price.
And finally, if you survive the cost math, you reach step 4, adoption. What are the actual human and political hurdles in rolling this out? Will your own employees resist the change? Will your retail partners hate it? Will the general public misunderstand it? You must address these adoption hurdles upfront through communication and education before you actually pull the trigger and launch.
If you can confidently check off utility, price, cost, and adoption, you have successfully de-risked your strategic move. You are ready to sail into the blue ocean.
Okay, let's take a collective breath here. We have covered an immense, almost overwhelming amount of ground today. We started by completely shattering the sacred value-cost trade-off, proving you can have both differentiation and low cost. We learned how to map out our industry on an equalizer canvas and how to violently adjust those sliders using the eliminate, reduce, raise, create grid.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. We explored the 6 paths to systematically find new boundaries across alternatives, groups, buyers, and trends. We talked about how to rip up the toxic spreadsheet-driven planning process and replace it with visual strategy fairs. We learned to aggressively target non-customers to desegment the market. And finally, we sequenced the strategy to totally mitigate our risk.
And what I hope listeners take away is the sheer universal applicability of this framework. These are not just esoteric tools for multi-billion-dollar aerospace corporations or international banks. These are fundamental mental models. You can apply the ERRC grid to your freelance graphic design business. You can apply the strategy canvas to a local coffee shop. You can apply the 6 paths to your own individual career trajectory. The fundamental life-changing shift here is moving your mindset away from competing for scarce resources and toward creating entirely new value.
Absolutely. You don't have to beat the competition if you make the competition irrelevant. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over on your own. It builds on what we were just discussing about non-excludable goods and the inability to patent business ideas.
Oh, this is a fun concept.
Right. If modern business ideas naturally spill over, and if corporate imitation is essentially inevitable, is the ultimate final evolution of the blue ocean strategy one that intentionally gives away its core innovation entirely for free? Do you build a product so utterly revolutionary and give it away to build an absolutely insurmountable global network effect before the competition even realizes the ocean exists and then figure out how to monetize the ecosystem later?
It is a fascinating paradigm to consider, because once you absolutely own the network, the ocean is yours, even if the water itself is free.
Exactly. You know, at the very beginning of this conversation, we talked about those ancient maps. Here be dragons, the edge of the world. What the blue ocean strategy ultimately shows us is that the dragons were never real. The edge of the map wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. So stop fighting over the shrinking chairs in the red ocean. Grab a blank canvas, chart a new course, and go find your blue ocean.